This week I celebrated 2 milestones. On Tuesday, God granted me the gift of my 54th solar return, otherwise known as a birthday. And this Shabbos, tonight and tomorrow, my twin brother and I celebrate the anniversary of our bar mitzvah 41 years ago. Reflecting on that day now, I remember walking with my father and brother from our hotel to Yamin Moshe, a beautiful neighborhood facing the walls of Yerushalayim, where my family had rented a small, quaint synagogue for the coming of age ceremony. I remember how excited I was and how scared also. I remember our outfits and I remember our cracking voices. And for some reason, I remember that neither my brother nor I gave a speech. And I feel that like each and every year as it comes around, when I speak on the Torah portion, I'm filling in what I didn't say then. And in many ways, I'm filling in what I never could say because the things that I've learned from my portion as an adult were not available to me as a child. So at least 2 times, maybe more, I've spoken to the very first part of the Shabbat's weekly wisdom, to the Tzav portion. The first part, a part that someone this week in my team over another job that I have called boring, it deals with an offering called the olah. One of the different types of offerings that were made in the Mishkan. A little bit hot and bothered, so 1 second. If the baby's gonna be doing the thing that, I'm gonna do the thing too, so. I'm saying, all right, let's get serious here, okay, here we go. We're gonna go toe to toe, you ready? Ready? I know. Hear me too. So here's the story. The beginning of the Parsha that I read with my brother 41 years ago, the beginning of the Torah portion known as Tzav, which means command. The first 6 verses deal with something called an olah. The olah was a kind of sacrifice that was offered in the temple. It was a holy burnt offering. It meant, as the Torah describes in Leviticus 6, 1, 2, 3, that the entire animal was put on the mizbech, on the altar, and then it burned the whole night. And by morning, you can imagine what it looked like. So every morning when the priest woke up, the priest did something called Trumat HaDeshen. Trumat HaDeshen was the lifting off of the altar of the ashes of that holy burnt offering. And I've spoken about this at least twice. I give a sermon called, I think it was Ashes, Ashes, We All Rise Up. I spoke about it last year. And each year I'm fascinated by this ritual, this symbolically beautiful ritual that has a number of different pieces to it. At least 4 pieces. The Torah goes out of its way to say that when the priest would come to the altar, the priest would lift up a herimet deshen, would take the deshen, which is the ashes, off of the altar. That was step number 1. And step number 2 is v'samo eitzel hamizbech. He would put it next to the altar, like an urn right here, next to the altar. That was step 2. And then the Torah tells us that the priest would then ufashatet bigadav v'lavash bigadim acharin. He would take off his clothing and put on other clothes. And the Torah tells us that. I mean, come on, really? Do we need to know that in the Torah? This is like some kind of fashion show, like the Oscars. Ufashatet bigadav v'lavash bigadim acharin. That's the 3rd step. And then the 4th step is the Kohen would take that urn full of messy, like these ashes, right, of the burnt offering, and take them michutz la'machana, outside the camp, el makom tahur, to a pure place. 4 steps. Clean the altar. Take the ashes, put them where? Where? Right next to the altar. Take a time out. Go change your clothing. Come back and pick it up again, and then take it to a pure place outside of the camp. 4 steps. And every year, as I think about this profound ritual and the seemingly irrelevant minutiae, I just think to myself, this is such a profound metaphor on so many levels for our spiritual lives, our national lives, our social lives. The fact that the Torah has a Torah of the olah, like there's a Torah of what it is to elevate. Olah means to send up. And that instead of telling us what the Torah of the olah is, it immediately pivots not from what goes up, but what is left behind. The remnant, the residue, the roshan. And it's messy. It's so messy that the Torah tells us that the Kohen has to change clothing, because the clothing that they were wearing when they were doing the sacred service, they're nice, fancy clothing that they wear only when they pray and they serve. Make sure you go put on jeans and a t-shirt, because you're going to get messy. The Torah of mess. That spirituality, building a life, building a family, building a society, building a nation. It has its elements, it has its holiness, it has its olah, it has the thing that you lift up, that you, as it were, bring to the altar, and then it has its inevitable ashes. The things that are the residue of the inevitable. If you want this, you can't have it without this. And the Torah tells us something so profound about how we treat our ashes. We treat them with reverence. Rav Kook, the great rabbi of pre-Mandate Palestine, wrote, he said, we place the ashes next to the mizbeach, next to the altar, to tell us about how powerful even that which is left over is. That which has been burnt up, that which is no longer, quote unquote, useful. In fact, the Maggid Mezrich, the great Hasidic Rebbe, said, let somebody who's looking for fire find it in the ashes. How much holiness is left in the embers of that which was left behind. And instead of discarding it or thinking of it as detritus, the Torah says, place it next to the altar, go get ready, and take it out to a holy place. Safeguard it. Safeguard the embers of what once was. It's hard not to read this and think to ourselves, wherever we are, about the way that we treat ashes. It's hard not to think about the embers that are still present in communities that were once vibrant and elevated and are now sometimes have some of that holy afar, that holy ash. The Torah tells us, treat that ash with dignity, with respect. It's beautiful. It once was, and still might yet be. It's hard not to think about our country at various moments, the process of becoming the country that we're supposed to be, the olah, the elevation, that doesn't, of course, come with messiness, the messy business of becoming from this imperfect union a more perfect union, and how frustrating it is and how angering it is. Isn't it true also of what's happening on the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem at these moments? With all that's taking place there, it's easy to lose sight of the remarkable democracy that is in the state of Israel at this moment. The profound beauty of seeing people waving Israeli flags even as they're critical of the government and forcing it to shut down without violence, using that power of the people to speak out against what was unjust, to speak out against what they don't want to see, to actually claim a vision of a more democratic and more just and more equitable Israel. Isn't that also profoundly true about that olah that has, of course, its ashes? And the Torah tells us, don't kick on the ashes. Don't have a protest where you place the ashes on the front of the altar and say, look at these ashes, everybody. It's not all there is. Wear the right clothing, get prepared to be messy, pick up the ashes, bring them to a holy place and say, also, this is part of what it means to grow. Right? Just as Ari is like, I saw that sacred moment just now. I don't know if people saw that. I'm literally talking about detritus and he lifts up the baby's tushy right to his nose. Did you see that? Did you see that? That was on cue. It's like, yep, that's the way it goes. It's profoundly true in our own personal lives. I was thinking about all of the ashes in my own journey and my own desire to be elevated in my life. How I might see those moments, how I might see those places that are the inevitable, right? The inevitable after effects of my yearning for more life, the mistakes I've made. It's hard not to think about it when you go back through the 41 solar returns since my bar mitzvah, how often I took the ashes and instead of treating them with reverence, I just discarded them. Or worse, I didn't want to get dirty. It's like I'd rather just be burning all the time, that fuel. So says Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the great German rabbi, the first thing we do when we come to the altar is we make room for the next iteration. We have to take the ashes off of the altar, remove them, because you can't light a fire if the ashes are still on the altar. And if you want a fire, you got to clean that altar. And then you deal with the mess. And you keep going. Every day, every morning, every evening. So this truth of how we clear the altar and how we lift up those ashes is our work each and every day. In so many different contexts, in so many different relationships, we are reminded by this truth. I'll just say one last thing. And I don't remember anymore. I don't listen to my own sermons, so I don't know if I'm repeating myself. So if somebody remembers, maybe no one remembers it, so it'll be fresh for you. So it'll be the first time. I remember that my father, should live and be well, left Germany in 1938, 6 months before Kristallnacht, and from 1938 until 2007, almost 70 years, he did not return to Germany because that was the promise he made to his mother, Irene, when they were entering into the harbor in New York. I will never go back. And when my grandmother, Alav Shalom, my grandmother, of blessed memory, passed away, my father felt as if his oath had been fulfilled. And when the Berlin government asked my father and my family to come back in 2007, we journeyed back to Berlin. And I spoke about it then in the shul. And I remember coming to the great synagogue that was in the center of Berlin that had been destroyed during Kristallnacht and had been restored. And as you walk into that synagogue, of course, they have a bit of a museum to the German community that was there before Kristallnacht, before the Shoah, before the Holocaust. And in the center of that museum, there is this Torah scroll, and it is opened to chapter 6 of the book of Leviticus, to the holy burnt offering, the Holocaust offering, which is what the word means, holy burnt. And I remember the tour guide said that this piece of Torah, on one level, is of course the destruction of German Jewry. But we learned, she said, from the ashes that were placed by the altar and then taken to a holy place, that this place would again hold sacred services. This place again would open itself and its doors to the rebirth of Judaism in Germany. And kachaya, that's what happened. And so I say to each and every one of you on the individual level, you are an ever returning person. You are an ever returning person. The ashes in your life have embers. As we cleanse the altar and we then ready ourselves to receive something fresh, we also turn in reverence to what was behind and what was burnt. And the same thing is true for us as a Jewish community and writ large. I believe in that power of humanity, and I believe in our capacity to rebuild and to recognize that building a life often involves a lot of ashes. May God bless us to be able to extract the holy embers. May God bless us to not give up on the profound responsibility to keep elevating ourselves and our world, and to treat that which is often seen as garbage as the sacred remnant of a yearning that can never, ever be extinguished. Please rise.